Hello and welcome to another episode of Trash to Track. Now in this episode we're going to be looking at this Mainline J72, but I'm going to do a two-parter, and in the next one I'm going to look at this Bachmann made model, which differs slightly. Now looking at the two, they do look identical, but when you put them side by side, the Mainline one is actually lower than the Bachmann one. It sits about half a mil lower. It is evident in this picture the buffers don't quite line up, but if you put look at them front end on, you can see there that they're not quite the same height. The Bachmann one is higher. So I'm going to assume that the Bachmann one is on correct wheels and the Mainline one is on undersized wheels. But as I said, I'm going to set the Bachmann one aside, and this episode we're going to concentrate on the older Mainline model, which dates from about 1981, and we'll have a look at this newer version in another video. Now this J72 was given to me by my great auntie Nora about 30 years ago, and it's had at least one repaint. As you can see, it's chipped badly, and you can see the white primer showing through. No front numbers, and on the bottom, that X, that is a replacement keeper plate, as it's had at least one set of new wheels in its lifetime while I've had it. And this model used to belong to my great uncle Harry. Now give it a battery test. There's very little movement, if any. It must be 20 years or more since I've tried to run this model, because it's not obviously digitally ready or digitally fitted, but I'm hoping it will be at the end of this video. So putting battery direct to the wheels, and there's very little there. Now there's also some detail missing, filler caps, handrails and stuff, and I've also got a scrap body shell which I found in the scrap box at Trains for You, so I'm going to rob this of the parts I need, the handrails and steam pipe and that, which wasn't actually on the Mainline one, but I'm going to fit it to this one just as a little bit of detail. So I'm going to rob that for parts. Now to release the body shell and chassis, now here I'm undoing the rear screw. Now you don't actually have to do this to release the body shell, but I just did it as I was going to replace all these screws, as these screws are, the heads have gone on them. They've been taken apart that many times. But to remove the body shell, you remove the front screw and then release the two clips at the back, and that separates the body and the chassis. And the chassis is the standard Mainline split chassis type with the gears in there. And I do know, even when I've had this model running on DC, this has had a lot of heavy use, so it's going to be interesting to see how this opens up and what it's like inside. Now a battery across the two halves of the chassis, that does then start to make the model move, so it's obviously a lot of built up dirt and grime which is preventing the wheels picking up any electricity. So I'm going to start by removing the base keeper plate. Again, these screws have had it, they're going to have to be replaced. The the chassis keeper plate, is in good condition. The axles are very dry, although very dirty, and one or two of them are starting to show signs of cracking. So I'm going to order some new axles up for the Mainline J72 from Peter Spares. And then the motor and the chassis themselves come apart by releasing the screws. Now there are several screws you have to undo to separate these two halves. So I am going to strip this down in its entirety, so I'm going to remove all the screws now. But just getting a cotton bud and some meths there, you can see there's quite a lot of old congealed oil along the bottom of this chassis, so I'm going to remove all that so I don't get it all over my fingers. And this must have been from the last time I took this apart, but I can't remember doing it, although I know I did do it, because that chassis keeper plate with the X on did come off a replacement chassis that when I bought new wheels for this. So I'm going to remove the brush holders first. I'm going to put all these to the side, keep them safe. There's the spring, and there's the brush. Now the brush was stuck in there, it would not come out. I had to tap the tap the back to get the spring out, and the actual whole holder came out with it, look, not just the brush. So I'm going to have to replace that. And there's the front plate of the motor, and that brush is also stuck in there. There was a lot of carbon and gunk build up on those brushes, so that'll all need cleaning off. And the usual method, cotton bud and methylated spirits to clean all this carbon and black deposits off the motor faceplate. This will all be nice and clean, ready for when refit it to the model later on. I'm also going to have to refit that brush holder. They're both loose. This one's loose as well. So now removing the other screws, this will then allow both halves of the chassis to be separated. And these screws were in there quite tight, so I was conscious I was going to end up breaking the plastic insulating pieces that hold these two chassis halves together. So it isn't always necessary to remove all the screws. Just screws from one half will allow you to take the model to pieces, but I wanted to remove everything and just give everything a general clean up, because it's been many years since this was taken apart. The gears are covered in a horrible old sticky lubricant which has dried out over the years, and there is the brass worm gear, I guess you'd call it, which is on the armature spindle, and there's also a lot of old manky crud all in the bottom here. The brass gear on the motor spindle does look to be quite worn, so I'm hoping that's going to work properly when we reassemble this. So now that everything has been stripped down, I'm going to give everything a thorough clean. First off, I'm going to rub everything with a cotton bud of methylated spirits to remove all the visible surface grime, and I do end up giving these a spray with some WD-40 contact cleaner as well, just to remove the remnants that the cotton buds missed. And it is very dirty. It's surprising how dirty this is, because it's had very little use. Like I said, it's not really ran in the last 20 years or so. Not since I've been digital. This has been sat in a box, tumbled around, hence the chip paintwork, and it's not seen much use at all. There's another screw there, and I will replace all the screws because the heads on all of the screws have gone. So I'm just looking at that cog there, the gear. It is slightly worn. Some of the teeth are worn down, so I'm really hoping that's not going to affect its running capabilities when we come to redo this model. And I also spend time cleaning out those axle holes, because it's important they are clean, because that's where the wheels pass their electricity to the chassis for pickup. The commutator faceplate was given a clean with cotton bud and meths, and then I used a fiberglass pencil to gently polish the surfaces up, as this was quite tarnished. Once that was done, again over it with cotton bud and meths to remove any fibres that were left, and it has actually come up nice and clean. The gaps between the brass plates are very shallow on these models, so it is worth cleaning them out, but they're not as deep as other ring-filled motors where a lot of the grime can accumulate. The gears are all given a thorough cleaning up as well. Again, cotton bud and meths seems to work best. Indeed, I've done many of these episodes now, and it's never really let me down. It will cut through most grime, even the hardest of stuff. This meths will cut through it. So that's a smaller gear, and this is the intermediate one all being cleaned. And to be honest, now that everything's being cleaned up, it's not going to be too long before we can start reassembling the model. See, there's some crud there I just got off. Look at that, look, with the cotton bud. Even when, with the cocktail stick. Even when you think you've got all the dirt, it's worth having a look over, because some bits can easily be missed. So now I'm going to start reassembling it, and the first thing I'm going to do is add some fresh lubrication in the form of some Labelle 106 grease. Again, I have mentioned this in other videos. People do leave comments to say, where do I get that from in this country? And I buy my Labelle grease from Trains for You, because they stock it in there. So every time I need one, they have had one in stock. So it's worth ringing around, especially Trains for You, because I know they stock it, because that's where I get mine from. So now that everything's been cleaned and there's been some lubrication on those gear spindles, the gears are put back into place. With a small amount of this Fleischmann oil as well, that will thin the grease down slightly to make it it will change its viscosity, so it's a bit thinner, and it will spread around the drivetrain nicely. So once that's all back in place, it's a case of then lining up all the plastic insulating pieces, and then we can put the two halves of the chassis back together. Now these bottom pieces here, they are a T-shape, and they go in with the, when you put them in, they're an upside down T-shape, so that the thick part sticks up into the chassis. The other two plastic separators are put in place, and there are two die-cast lugs inside the chassis which these rest against. And once that's all back in place, I will replace these screws with some others that I've got out of my spares box that have come off a J72 that I've stripped in the past when I got the wheel set for this model. So now that's all back in, I'm just going to add a tiny amount of oil to the bearing on the motor faceplate there, and I'm going to put that back in place. And I am going to replace the brushes and springs at this point, just to test the model, because if it doesn't work on DC, there's no point in converting it to DCC. So we will come back to taking this apart later when I convert it to digital. So the brushes on this model are actually Hornby brushes, they're not the original mainline ones, which is probably why they're a little bit too wide really for this model. They do work, but you could do with having some thinner brushes, to be honest. So the brush was held in place, the spring was put on, and then the keeper part was then screwed on, holding it in place, otherwise the spring pressure will push that off into the ether. So you must hold it in place while you screw the brush retainers back in. The wheels were then given a quick clean up, and again cocktail stick was used to scrape off the worst of that black carbon buildup. And then very loosely, with everything put back together, the chassis was given a battery test, and it was attempting to move, and then all of a sudden it burst into life. Now compare that to how it was when we did a battery test before. This model is now actually running lovely, and this is the first time it's ran in anger for, like I said, the best part of 20 years. So now that I know it's running well and it's relatively quiet, what I'm going to do is put it on the backrest saddles and give it a run on there. And on the saddles there is a bit of a wobble, but when it runs on the rails that isn't there. And bear in mind, this is running without the keeper plate on the bottom or anything like that. So there is going to be a wobble because the axles aren't exactly being held in place correctly. So I did give it a bit of a run to get the lubrication spread through the drivetrain. And then as you'll see here, I've put the keeper plate back on now, and it's running on the track with no wobbles whatsoever. So that is actually really good. Now it may seem a bit of a challenge to fit a decoder to this, and it's not easy, but I will highlight that in a moment. What I'm going to do now is look at this body shell. Now the cab roof and windows are a separate item, but I am going to strip this down. Now I used some Revell paint remover for this, which allegedly is safe on plastics, and it was in the main, although the safety valve dove melted. So you've got to be watching it careful for that. Now here with DCC fitted it, now I didn't film it because I needed to concentrate, but what I did here was I cut the retaining pieces and then using a solder tab soldered the wires on, and there is a small piece of clear plasticard between the solder tab and the brush retainer. Now what I'm going to do in the comments, I'll put a link to the Rmweb page where I got this method from, and this is a direct copy. They will explain it better than I can. But I basically cut the screw holes off the brush retainer, small piece of clear plastic card in between that and the solder tab, soldered a decoder on, and as you can see now it's actually running really nicely. So I've managed to DCC fit this split chassis J72 and it's working nicely. So the body shell is now back from the paint shop, and it's in a lovely coat of semi-gloss black with new transfers on it. And the front transfers on the front number plate there, this bit here is the bit that melted, so that's off the donor body. The rest of the body shell was fine, but these numbers on the front here are actually Tops diesel numbers that are tiny, because I didn't actually have any LNER ones in store at the time of filming this, but I have got some on order, and I will change those transfers when they arrive. So putting the body shell back on the chassis, the cab roof module is missing now. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to manipulate this decoder in around this weight, and then I'm going to clip the cab roof module in, and it will hold it in place. Now, this is a TCS MC2 decoder. It's the smallest one I could find. I'm also going to put some Dulux Materials glue and glaze in those spectacle plates. And eventually I managed to shoehorn everything in, and it's now DCC fitted, and all the body shell has been repaired. Any missing handrails have been replaced. I've added a vacuum pipe on the front and back, which wasn't present on the mainline model, but was on the Bachmann one. and the steam pipe's been added, and I'm really pleased with how this has turned out. It's now digitally fitted and it's starting to look really nice. And I'm pleased. I'm pleased I've managed to get this old model, which was given to me by my great auntie over probably 30 years ago now. And I used to run it all the time, and I do like these models. And I'm pleased it's running. But when I tested it on the layout, it wasn't running properly. There was a bit of a limp, and it kept kicking out when it was trying to speed up and would stall the model. So I've actually got some replacement axles now, as I said, from Peter's Spares. And in the background there, just as an insight, you can see that Engaged Schools class on the workbench. This was the one I did several episodes ago, which actually Jeff sent back to me because initially the motor failed on it. So I got a new one from Dapo. And then the cog stripped itself, so it's not a very good model at all. And I do feel sorry for Jeff. But as I was saying, this J72, these are replacement axles from Peter Spares. So these are the circular ones. So when you fit these, you have to make sure you get the quarter in exactly right, because if you don't, the model simply won't run. The later Bachmann axles had square axles and square holes in the squares on the wheels and square holes in the axles, so you could get the quarter in correct. But on these ones, they're just a circular push fit. So on one side I set the wheels to 12 o'clock, on the other side I set them to 3 o'clock. Checked and double checked everything 2 or 3 times before testing. And you also have to make sure when you do this, you get the side rods on the correct way around, because the ones under the cab are longer than the ones from the smoke box. And make sure that the side rods are the correct way up, with the representation of the oil boxes facing upwards. So it is quite a task getting the quartering and everything right on this, because even if it's off by a very, very slight amount, it will stop the model from running. So here we are there, new axles on there, none of them are split, they're all quartered correctly now. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to put a small amount of Pico Electro Lube on those axles. It will lubricate it up, and it will also help with conductivity, because it is a conductive lubricant. So here you see the J72 with its new axles, and you can see the slow speed control on this model for a model that was made in 1981. This is phenomenal, and I am actually overjoyed that I've got this model running again, and I'm hoping Auntie Nora's up there somewhere looking down and proud that an engine she gave me that belonged to my uncle is now fully back in service and digitally fitted for the modern age. So here we have it shuttling up and down on the small test track on my layout. And there you will get to see it running around the garden on a rake of thoroughly mainline wagons. All the wagons this J72 is pulling are made by Mainline. If you've got an engine or anything you'd like to see featured on a future episode of Trash to Track, please email me at dansmodelrailways@gmail.com. Have a look at it, get it sent over, and who knows, it may even feature in an episode all of its own. So this was part 1, as I said. This is part 1 of 2, and in the next Trash to Track we'll look at the Bachmann model, the newer version, not the brand new one, but it's split chassis again, and we'll have a look at the differences in DCC fitting it and how it's constructed, because there are quite significant differences between that and this mainline one. Thank you so much for watching Trash to Track again. I'll leave you now with the J72 hauling its goods train around the garden, and I'll catch you all in the next episode. Bye for now.